Elias Renner had always believed that rules existed for a reason. On Haven Spire Station, rules were everything. They controlled the air composition, the gravity balance, the movement of species through corridors, and even the colors of warning lights. Every law was written by the Galactic Council after centuries of trial, failure, and fear. Humans, being late arrivals to the galaxy, were taught to respect these laws without question. Elias was a systems engineer, not a soldier or politician. His job was simple: make sure the shared infrastructure worked as designed. That morning, he stood on an elevated platform overlooking a construction bay where several species worked together, each separated by invisible environmental fields. Some breathed methane-heavy air, some needed higher pressure, and others, like humans, thrived in the neutral standard zone. He checked his wrist console, reviewing stability reports for the mag-rail system running across the bay. Everything looked normal, too normal. Elias had learned that when systems looked perfect, something unexpected was usually waiting. Across the bay, an alien envoy named Sarai supervised her people's side of the project. Her species, the Valari, were considered extremely fragile. According to council law, Valari could only survive inside sealed suits filled with a carefully balanced gas mixture. Their helmets were reinforced, locked, and never meant to be removed outside controlled environments. Elias had spoken to Sarai a few times through translators and screens. She was calm, thoughtful, and curious about humans in a way most species were not. She asked questions about Earth's oceans, about rain, about why humans smiled so often. Elias found those conversations comforting in a place ruled by caution. A warning tone suddenly echoed through the bay. Elias looked up just as the mag-rail platform shuddered. A cargo module shifted off alignment. Automated stabilizers tried to correct it, but the correction came too late. The platform jerked sideways. Shouts echoed. Workers moved back instinctively. Safety fields activated, but the force of the movement sent Sarai stumbling. Elias watched in horror as she struck the edge of a support beam. Her helmet hit first. There was a sharp crack. Time seemed to slow. The helmet's seal fractured, and the protective dome came loose. It rolled across the platform and fell into the neutral air zone. The bay went silent. Every being present knew what that meant: exposure, contamination, death within seconds, according to everything they had been taught. Sarai collapsed to her knees, her slender form trembling. Elias felt his heart hammer in his chest. Training screamed at him to stay back. Emergency protocols demanded total isolation. Alarms began to blare as the system registered a catastrophic breach. Elias stared at Sarai, waiting for the moment when her body would fail. It didn't happen. She inhaled. Once. Then again. Her movements were unsteady, but she was breathing. Murmurs spread across the bay. Some workers stepped back in shock. Others froze, unable to process what they were seeing. The alarms grew louder, flashing warnings in multiple languages. Elias' mind raced. The data didn't match reality. Valari could not survive in standard air. That was absolute law. And yet here she was, alive. Security drones descended from the ceiling, their smooth metallic forms surrounding the platform. A voice echoed through the bay, calm and cold. Biological containment breach detected. All personnel remained still. Sarai looked up, her uncovered eyes wide with fear and confusion. She touched her throat, clearly struggling but not dying. Her gaze met Elias' across the distance. In that moment, Elias understood something that no training manual had prepared him for. The laws were wrong, or incomplete, or deliberately false. He stepped forward. "Human engineer, remain in your zone," the security system warned. Elias didn't stop. He crossed the boundary line between zones, feeling the slight pressure change as the environmental field adjusted. Gasps followed him. No human had ever crossed into a compromised area during an active breach. Sarai tried to speak, but her translator lay damaged beside her. Elias knelt at a careful distance, moving slowly so he wouldn't frighten her. "You're breathing," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "You're alive." Her eyes focused on him. She nodded, a small, uncertain motion. Security drones moved closer, lights pulsing red. "Step away immediately," the system commanded. "The subject must be isolated." Elias raised his hands, not in surrender but in refusal. "If you isolate her, you'll kill her," he said. "She needs time, her body is adjusting." "That is not possible," the system replied. "Valeri biology cannot." "I'm watching it happen," Elias said. His voice was steady now. "Record the data, look at her vitals." There was a pause. Systems hesitated only when conflicting protocols collided. Data streamed across Elias' wrist console as the station's sensors complied. Heart rate elevated but stabilizing. Oxygen absorption present. No immediate cellular collapse. Elias felt a chill run through him. Proof. Real, undeniable proof. Sarai's breathing slowed. She pressed one hand to the deck, steadying herself. Her fear eased slightly as she realized she was still alive. More personnel arrived at the bay's edges. Engineers, diplomats, and observers watched in stunned silence. Some whispered, others recorded everything. Elias stood and positioned himself between Sarai and the approaching drones. "If you detain her now, you erase the truth," he said. "You'll hide this because it scares you." The system's voice hardened. "Human engineer Elias Renner, you are in violation of Galactic Biocontainment Law 17. Elias nodded. "I know." He had never broken a major law in his life. Humans were known for creativity, not defiance. But looking at Sarai, alive in an air she was never meant to breathe, Elias knew this moment mattered more than his career, his record, or his safety. Medical teams arrived, carrying sealed equipment. They hesitated, unsure which protocol applied anymore. Sarai slowly stood, unsteady but determined. She looked around the bay, then back at Elias. Her uncovered face showed something unexpected, not fear but wonder. She took another breath, deeper this time. The alarms began to quiet as the system downgraded the emergency. Not resolved but no longer catastrophic. Elias felt the weight of countless eyes on him. He also felt something else, a sense that history had shifted just slightly off its old path. Security drones moved in, but slower now, careful, uncertain. Elias did not resist as they finally escorted both him and Sarai toward isolation. But as they moved, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. The galaxy had been built on assumptions. And humans had just seen one of them fall. The isolation wing of Haven Spire Station was quieter than any place Elias had ever known. The walls were smooth and pale, designed to calm nervous minds, but to Elias they felt like a cage. Transparent barriers separated rooms, allowing observation without contact. Every breath he took reminded him that nothing was normal anymore. Sarai was placed in the chamber across from him. Unlike before, she was not sealed inside a full suit. Medical staff had wanted to force her back into one, but the data from the bay made that impossible to ignore. She had survived too long. Her body had adapted too quickly. Elias watched as sensors floated around her, projecting soft light and quiet readings. Her breathing was steady now. Her posture was upright. She looked tired but alive. Council representatives arrived within hours. They appeared on large hollow screens lining the observation hall, their forms sharp and imposing. Different species, different shapes, all united by the same expression of concern. "This incident is being classified as a controlled anomaly," one counselor said. "No public release is authorized." Elias felt anger rise in his chest. "It wasn't an anomaly," he said calmly. "It was proof." "You are a systems engineer," another counselor replied, "not a biological authority." "I know what I saw," Elias said, "and so did everyone else in that bay." The counselors exchanged glances. Silence followed, heavy and deliberate. Sarai stepped closer to the barrier on her side. Her translator had been repaired and now rested around her neck. "I am not dying," she said clearly. "Your laws say I should be, but I am not." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The counselors did not respond immediately. "The Valari have always been classified as environmentally dependent," one finally said. "Your survival does not change centuries of research." "Or perhaps," Elias replied, "your research never asked the right questions." That was enough to shift the tone. Elias was escorted back to his room without ceremony. The barrier sealed with a soft hum. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time felt strange in isolation. Elias used the quiet to think. He replayed the sensor readings again and again on his wrist console. Oxygen absorption, blood chemistry shifts, adaptive cellular responses. Humans were known for adaptability, but this was different. This was cross-species compatibility. A message blinked onto his console. Access request. Human Research Collective. Haven Node. Elias hesitated, then approved it. A group of human faces appeared, engineers, doctors, scientists. They spoke quickly, excited but careful. "We saw the footage," one said. "They tried to suppress it, but not fast enough." "We pulled atmospheric data from the bay," another added. "Standard air isn't pure. It's a blend designed for mixed species." Elias leaned forward. "You're saying the environment itself is already shared?" "Yes," the scientist replied. "The Council adjusted it centuries ago, just enough to allow safe overlap, but they kept the old classifications." "They never updated the laws," Elias said quietly. "Or they did," someone else said, "and buried the results." Elias looked back at Sarai through the barrier. She was speaking with a Valari medic now, her gestures calm, her voice steady. "What do you need from me?" Elias asked. "Time," the collective said, "and access." Elias smiled faintly. "I can give you both." Over the next cycles, Elias became a quiet conduit of information. He shared sensor logs, medical readings, and system histories. The human collective worked fast, cross-checking everything with archived data. Patterns emerged. Other species labeled fragile had similar suppressed anomalies, short exposure events. Survivors quietly reclassified, reports sealed. The laws were not just outdated. They were enforced ignorance. Sarai was allowed limited movement within the isolation wing. Under supervision, she walked without a helmet, breathing station air freely. Each step she took challenged everything the Council claimed to protect. Elias was brought before an internal review board. The tone was less threatening now, more cautious. "You have created instability," a Council official said. "Species depend on these laws for safety." "No," Elias replied. "They depend on them for certainty. Safety comes from truth. You are suggesting a galactic restructuring based on a single incident." "I'm suggesting you look at your own data," Elias said. The review ended without a verdict. Word spread anyway. Humans across Haven Spire began asking questions. Engineers reviewed environmental systems. Doctors compared physiology data. Diplomats requested transparency reports. Humans did not shout or riot. They simply examined the problem. That unsettled the Council more than anger ever could. Sarai met Elias in a shared observation room one cycle later. A thin barrier still separated them, but it was symbolic now. "My people are afraid," she said. "They were taught that exposure meant death. That dependence kept us safe." Elias nodded. "Fear is easy to maintain. It's hard to let go." "But I do not feel weak," Sarai said. "I feel expanded." Elias smiled. "That's how humans feel when we learn something new." The Council issued a directive soon after. All human-led environmental research was to be paused, data sharing restricted. Movement limited. Humans complied publicly. Privately, they continued. Adaptive habitat simulations were built, medical models updated. Voluntary exposure tests were proposed, reviewed, and refined. Everything was documented. Everything was careful. Elias became a symbol without trying to be. Other species began contacting him quietly. Questions arrived, cautious and hopeful. Is it true we could survive outside our suits? Would it hurt? Why were we never told? Elias answered honestly. I don't know yet. But we can find out together. The council called another session. This time they included more observers. The chamber felt tense, brittle. You are exceeding your authority, a counselor said. We are expanding knowledge, Elias replied. Knowledge destabilizes. So does ignorance, Elias said. Sarai stood beside him, unhelmeted, breathing easily. Her presence said more than any argument. The session ended without resolution. But something had changed. Humans were no longer just participants in the galactic system. They were investigators of it. And once humans began to question a rule, they rarely stopped at the first answer. Elias looked out through the station viewport at the endless stars. Somewhere among them were countless species living behind invisible walls. For the first time, those walls had cracks, and humanity was already learning how to widen them. Weeks passed, and Haven Spire Station had begun to change, almost imperceptibly, under the quiet influence of Elias and the humans who had joined his cause. There was no rebellion in the conventional sense. No fleets, no weapons, no loud proclamations. Instead, human ingenuity spread like a gentle current, reshaping the rules from within. Engineers upgraded environmental systems, blending atmospheres in ways previously thought impossible. Doctors and biologists studied cross-species compatibility with unprecedented precision. Diplomats initiated dialogue that no protocol had ever allowed. Everywhere, humans were asking questions that forced others to do the same. Sarai had grown more confident. Once fragile, once obedient to laws written in fear, she now moved with purpose through areas of the station that had previously been off-limits. Her bare skin felt the regulated air, and she realized that the rules she had always obeyed were not universal truths but tools of control. She worked closely with Elias, coordinating tests on limited groups of willing volunteers from her species, monitoring their reactions, noting minute improvements, and designing schedules for safe exposure. Each successful trial was another crack in the foundations of the Council's rigid regulations. Elias walked beside her one cycle as they observed a hybrid habitat test in the engineering bay. The facility had been constructed under the guise of maintenance work. Species previously separated by strict environmental laws now moved freely, observing one another, exchanging gestures, and sometimes even helping across species barriers. Humans adjusted air composition subtly, letting creatures test the limits of their adaptability while keeping safety protocols in place. The Council's monitoring systems registered the anomalies, yet humans worked methodically, proving through careful experimentation that cohabitation was not just possible, it was natural. Observers from other species arrived quietly, curious, cautious, but increasingly open-minded. A species that had been considered weak by ancient classifications now discovered that, with careful adjustment, even prolonged exposure was safe. They spoke in low tones among themselves, surprised by the human approach. Humans never demanded obedience, they only offered evidence. Humans never assumed superiority, they offered participation. In every gesture, every calculation, humans modeled what they called the adaptive principle. That intelligence, patience, and care could achieve what strict laws never could. A council representative called an emergency session when the first hybrid trials showed consistent success. The chamber filled with tension. Aliens of all shapes and sizes filled the room, staring at humans who quietly presented their findings. Elias stood at the center, holding a tablet that displayed comprehensive data on each trial. Sarai stood beside him, unhelmeted, a living example of the principle they had demonstrated. Her species, considered fragile for centuries, had now walked freely across controlled spaces without harm. "You are exceeding the bounds of your authority," one counselor said sharply. His voice carried the weight of tradition, the expectation that humans would obey. Elias looked around the chamber calmly. "We are demonstrating possibility," he said. "We are showing that safety is not maintained through isolation or fear, but through understanding and care." The counselor frowned. "And yet these actions undermine the laws we have maintained for centuries. You risk destabilizing the order of every station, every colony, every habitat in the galaxy." "Perhaps," Elias replied. "Or perhaps the laws were never meant to protect. Perhaps they were meant to control." A murmur rippled through the room. Some species exchanged looks of concern. Others silently nodded. Humans had no intention of overthrowing the council. They only intended to show that cohabitation, collaboration, and shared knowledge were not only safe but necessary for progress. Sarai stepped forward. "I survived because of this exposure. My people believed it impossible, but it is possible. We are stronger than your assumptions, stronger than your classifications, and humans showed us that." Her voice, calm but unwavering, carried across the chamber. "We will learn, we will adapt, and we will thrive, not because laws allowed it, but because truth permitted it." The council debated, but no immediate verdict was issued. Instead, some representatives quietly requested access to the experimental data. Others sent observers to Haven Spire to witness the process firsthand. The message was clear: humans could not be ignored. Elias returned to the lab with Sarai. They walked through corridors where subtle changes were already evident. Equipment had been recalibrated to allow cross-species experimentation. Medical pods and environmental control stations hummed with activity. Volunteers from multiple species moved carefully between zones, monitored but free to explore the air, the light, the gravity, the experience. Each successful trial increased confidence, reducing fear and increasing curiosity. The human collective grew, drawing together engineers, biologists, medics, and diplomats. All of them contributed knowledge, ideas, and insight. They were not working in secrecy anymore, though caution remained necessary. Instead, they created what could only be described as a network of shared intelligence. Every successful test, every observation, every record reinforced a central principle. Humanity thrived not by domination, not by conquest, but by understanding. Elias paused at a workstation, reviewing the latest results. Oxygen absorption levels were stable, heart rates were normal. Cellular responses indicated resilience and adaptation. In simple words, the impossible had become routine. Sarai approached, leaning over his shoulder. "The data shows what we already know," she said. "Humans see possibility where others see danger." He nodded. "It's not just humans, it's curiosity, care, and patience. We applied those traits and the results are undeniable. Fear and isolation cannot compete with truth." A few days later, an unexpected event tested their progress. A minor systems failure occurred in one of the hybrid habitats. The air mixture briefly fluctuated, creating an environment that could have endangered unprotected species. The Council's emergency alarms activated immediately, signaling disaster. Elias and his team reacted swiftly. Humans coordinated responses, adjusting oxygen, pressure, and gravity within seconds. Species that had previously relied on isolation now relied on observation and cooperation. Medical monitors tracked every vital sign. Every being in the habitat responded not with panic but with adaptability, following instructions and gestures from humans who calmly directed the emergency response. By the time the council representatives arrived, the incident had been resolved. No injuries occurred. No species suffered. What might have been a disaster became a demonstration. Humans did not defy laws recklessly. They replaced fear with preparation, isolation with coordination, and rigid rules with careful guidance. Sarai stood in the center of the restored habitat, observing the others as they resumed normal activities. She looked at Elias and smiled. "This is what humans do," she said. "We follow their lead and we survive." Word of the successful intervention spread quickly. Observers from multiple species arrived on Haven Spire, eager to witness how humans managed complexity without coercion. Council representatives continued to monitor, but their tone shifted from accusation to curiosity. Every success by humans made resistance harder to justify. Elias reflected on how different this was from what he had imagined when he first stepped onto the station. He had expected bureaucracy, fear, and strict adherence to laws. Instead, he found cooperation, intelligence, and adaptability. Humans were not warriors in this story. They were guides, they were collaborators, they were teachers, showing the galaxy that caution and control were not the only paths to survival. At night, as the station's artificial sun dimmed, Elias looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere in the vastness, countless species lived behind barriers built of fear and assumption. Some of those species had already begun to send envoys, asking questions. Others would follow. Humans had started a quiet revolution, not through violence, not through defiance for its own sake, but through example. Sarai joined him at the viewport. Her face reflected the distant stars, her eyes calm and determined. "Do you think they will ever understand?" she asked. "They already are," Elias replied. "Every being we touch, every law we examine, every trial we conduct, understanding grows. It may be slow, but humans have a way of showing the possible. That is enough." And so Haven Spire changed, quietly and steadily. It became a model station, a place where species could test limits safely, learn from one another, and discover that fear was not a requirement for survival. Humans were not rulers, not conquerors, not rebels. They were the species that showed the galaxy the meaning of adaptability, curiosity, and hope. Through careful planning, shared knowledge, and simple courage, humans were rewriting the rules, not by breaking them violently, but by proving them unnecessary. The Council could oppose, restrict, and delay, but the evidence was growing too strong. The galaxy was beginning to see that cooperation, not fear, was the path forward. Elias and Sarai walked together through the bustling corridors. Humans and other species worked side by side. Systems hummed, data streamed, questions were asked and answered. Every step was a testament to the principle they embodied. Understanding, preparation, and adaptability could succeed where rigid law failed. And somewhere in the infinite stretch of space, other stations, other colonies, other species began to notice. The quiet revolution had started. Humans were not loud. Humans did not strike with fleets or weapons. Humans struck with ideas, with care, and with proof that life could thrive when fear was replaced by knowledge. Elias smiled faintly as he watched the activity. The journey was far from over, but the first steps had been taken. One by one, species would learn to breathe together, to live together, to trust what humans had already demonstrated, that the possible was only limited by imagination and courage. The galaxy was listening. Humanity was teaching. And hope, steady and bright, was spreading among the stars. Elias stood at the central observation deck of Haven Spire Station, looking out at the glittering expanse of stars. From here, the station seemed almost serene, a bubble of controlled light and activity amidst the darkness of space. But beneath that calm, a quiet revolution was unfolding. Humanity's influence was no longer hidden behind careful experimentation and cautious tests. It was visible in the way multiple species moved together freely, in the adaptive habitats thriving without incident, and in the growing curiosity that could not be contained by rules or laws. The Galactic Council had convened an emergency session to address what they now openly referred to as the Human Initiative. Representatives from dozens of species crowded the holographic chamber, their forms diverse and alien. Tentacles, wings, elongated limbs, and bioluminescent eyes filled the space. Elias knew they were watching, waiting for humans to falter. He also knew humans did not falter when they had knowledge and care on their side. Sarai appeared beside him, unhelmeted and confident. She was no longer the fragile envoy who had fallen through the mag rail. Her species had participated in multiple exposure trials and survived, proving adaptability where none had been expected. She looked over the data on her wrist display and then back at Elias. "They will challenge us," she said, "but they cannot ignore the evidence." Elias nodded. "They can resist, they can debate, but they cannot unsee what we've shown them." The session began. A counselor, his carapace glinting under the chamber lights, spoke first. "Humans, your actions violate multiple provisions of galactic law. You have exposed species to environments that, according to centuries of regulation, are unsafe. You have overridden isolation protocols. You have circumvented authority." Elias listened, calm. He had prepared for this. He stepped forward, letting the council see not defiance but clarity. "We have followed all procedures for safety. We did not act recklessly. We acted responsibly. Species were not harmed. In fact, they thrived." Murmurs ran through the chamber. Some counselors shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, curious. "This cannot be possible," one voice protested. "The Valeri and others like them should not survive without protective environments." Sarai stepped to the podium beside Elias. "I am the living proof," she said. Her voice echoed clearly across the chamber. "We were told exposure meant death. We were told humans would not allow us to survive, but we did. And we continue to thrive. This is not an isolated incident. Every trial has produced similar results across multiple species." The counselors exchanged tense glances. The holographic screens displayed live feeds from the hybrid habitats. Valeri humans and several other species moved side by side, breathing the same air, interacting safely, adapting in real time. The evidence was undeniable. A representative of the water-dwelling Erythian spoke. "If this is true, it challenges the very foundation of galactic law. Our protocols are built on fear and assumption, not observation." "That is correct," Elias said. "Fear is not a guide to safety. Understanding is. Care and knowledge are stronger than control and isolation. Humans have always thrived by learning and adapting, and now we have demonstrated that these principles can help the galaxy as a whole." A tense silence followed. The counselors could argue, resist, or delay, but the simple, undeniable fact remained. The laws they had enforced for centuries were no longer absolute. Species could survive together safely. Humanity had shown them the way. Finally, a counselor spoke, her voice cautious but firm. "Then what do you propose? Should we dismantle centuries of regulations based on your tests?" Elias answered without hesitation. "Not dismantle, evolve. Let the laws reflect reality, not fear. Let species decide for themselves where safety lies. Let collaboration replace isolation. Let truth, guided by careful observation, replace blind obedience." A murmur of agreement rippled through parts of the chamber. Others bristled, unwilling to accept such radical change. Elias knew not all counselors would immediately accept the proposal, but humanity did not need unanimous approval. They only needed the first steps. Outside the chamber, Haven Spire was already a model for what could be achieved. Habitats had been redesigned for shared occupation. Medical protocols allowed controlled exposure. Species previously isolated now communicated directly with one another, learning, sharing, and adapting in ways that no law had ever permitted. Children from different species played together in carefully controlled recreation areas. Engineers worked alongside biologists, medics, and diplomats, creating a network of knowledge that transcended traditional boundaries. Sarai and Elias walked together through the station, observing the results of months of careful effort. A young Valari child mimicked human gestures, laughing freely in the artificial light. An alien botanist adjusted a humidity regulator while a human engineer fine-tuned airflow, working side by side. It was a scene of cooperation, of shared achievement, of proof that coexistence was possible. "They will adapt," Sarai said softly. "The Council, the galaxy, they will follow," Elias smiled. "Humans have a way of showing the possible. Once others see it, they usually want to join." Weeks later, a new session of the Council convened. This time, the tone was different. Instead of issuing ultimatums or threats, representatives came to observe, to ask questions, to learn. A charter was proposed, not written by humans alone, but inspired by them. It outlined new principles for shared habitats, voluntary exposure, and cooperative development. Every species would have the freedom to participate at its own pace. Safety would be based on observation and preparation, not fear. Elias and Sarai were present as observers. They did not dictate, they guided. When a counselor questioned the safety of a new exposure trial, Elias calmly presented the data, explained the protocols, and described the careful measures taken to ensure well-being. Sarai added her personal experience, her own survival and adaptation. Slowly, hesitation gave way to acceptance. Outside the council chambers, Haven Spire continued its quiet transformation. More species requested access to the hybrid habitats. Volunteers lined up for controlled exposure. Medical teams monitored every detail, ready to respond, but rarely needing to intervene. The principles Elias had demonstrated, curiosity, care, preparation, and adaptability, spread beyond the station to other colonies, to smaller stations, to trading hubs. Elias stood once more at the observation deck, looking at the stars stretching endlessly before him. The galaxy was vast, and the work ahead was enormous. There were systems still governed by fear, species still constrained by outdated laws, and councils still resistant to change. But the first steps had been taken. Humanity had shown that rules could evolve, that laws could reflect reality, and that cooperation was stronger than isolation. Sarai joined him silently. Her hand rested briefly on the railing. "Do you think we can truly change the galaxy?" she asked. Elias looked out at the distant lights of distant worlds. "Not in a day, not in a year, but every species we help, every law we evolve, every mind we open, that is progress. And progress spreads faster than any fleet." The stars beyond Haven Spire seemed to shimmer with possibility. Across the galaxy, envoys and observers sent messages of curiosity and hope. Humans were no longer just participants, they were catalysts, not through force but through example, intelligence, and care. In the months that followed, the Council slowly ratified new protocols. Hybrid habitats became the standard for cooperative stations. Species began to train together, sharing knowledge, exchanging culture, and exploring the limits of adaptability. Safety was measured not by law alone but by observation, preparation, and the willingness to learn from evidence. Elias and Sarai continued their work, moving quietly but decisively. Every success reinforced the principle that had guided humanity from the beginning. The impossible could become possible when fear was replaced by curiosity and care. Every trial, every observation, every small victory was another step toward a galaxy where cooperation could thrive. The quiet revolution had become unstoppable. Across the stars, species learned to breathe together, to live together, and to trust that knowledge, not fear, was the true path to survival. Humans had not conquered the galaxy with fleets or weapons. They had conquered it with understanding. Elias turned to Sarai, and they watched a young human child offer a hand to a Valari child, teaching them to balance in the artificial gravity. Laughter filled the observation deck, a sound free from fear, free from rules, free from expectation. The galaxy had begun to change. Humanity had begun to lead, not through law but through example. And in that moment, Elias understood the truth he had discovered months ago. Progress did not come from obedience or from strict rules or from fear. It came from courage, from curiosity, from the willingness to act when the impossible demanded action. And humanity had chosen to act. The stars stretched endlessly, full of worlds yet untouched, full of minds yet unchallenged. Humanity's light had begun to spread, quietly, steadily, and irreversibly. Through patience, intelligence, and care, the galaxy was awakening to a new reality. And it all began because one human had seen a helmet fall, and in that fleeting moment had decided to defy not for power, but for truth. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it meant to adapt, to care, and to thrive. And the galaxy would never be the same. Her helmet fell, and in that moment, I decided I'd defy every law to HFY Stories, best HFY Stories.